Well, welcome, Ken. Really great to have you here, from the API Evangelist. Today, we're going to be speaking on how to best productize and monetize APIs, especially in large enterprise settings. Just jumping into things, what does it mean to productize and monetize APIs? And why is it growing traction within enterprise environments?
Well, I mean, folks, you got to justify your spend. I mean, first and foremost, APIs cost money. I think the last research bit I did, it costs 50 grand to stand up an API and sustain it and maintain it. You're spending money. And then secondarily, we all need to make money. So you've got to be able to, all right, what resources are we making available here? And how are we going to not give away the farm, especially in an AI world, and just give away all of our digital resources? I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions people have about public or externally available HTTP APIs. They're going to give away something, and so that monetization is really just about getting a handle on your digital resources and understand how they're being applied.
Makes sense. And definitely, as we're looking at the cost of deploying those APIs and standing those up, has anything changed, from, APIs been around since, back in the, enterprise service bus and the like. But why is it such a topic now?
Yeah, interestingly, my Amazon bill has gone up. It has not gone down since 2010. I've been running APIs ever since. The shift. I mean, and I'm clearly not an enterprise operations, but just relating it here is with regular instances and VMs to a more containerized or serverless approach. I kind of leaned heavily into the serverless, but I'm coming back to a kind of common, more basic virtualization because my resource management and what I'm having to do. Hasn't changed a lot, to be honest, and my bill's gotten worse. So, I'm really trying to figure out how to get back to basics. And I know a lot of the enterprises that I work with, they're questioning some of the more expendier parts of their rollouts that they've done around other types of APIs, GraphQL, Kafka, other things that may have not have achieved exactly what they needed. And then the API sprawl, and figure out, how are we going to, pay for all of this and how we're going to make money here. So not as lot has changed. It's gotten more expensive and more complicated and more sprawling, but I wouldn't say the technical bits have really changed all that much.
So it sounds like driving a lot of efficiency, trying to get more out of those investments into these API programs, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think of FinOps, and how that's kind of spun up as far as financial, understanding your financial operations. So think of that in terms of APIs from just, what's our cloud bill? What's our spend? What does it cost to run these things? But you can't just pinch pennies, and you can't just impose austerity on API operations. You've got to understand and make sense of that and actually try to figure out, well, what do we have here that's worth keeping? What digital resources, what capabilities do we have here that are needed, that are useful, and maybe we're not squeezing as much revenue out of them as we could if we just kind of carved them up in new and interesting ways, or we paid attention to different groups of users in different ways. We looked at things regionally. I just think there's a lot of ways we can, I mean, my business is helping you survey and assess that sprawling API landscape that you have. But you're really in the business of, all right, once as we're surveying this, what's here, what's valuable, what's useful, how are people using it currently, and then how do we incrementally maybe start optimizing and generating new revenue from those digital resources.
So it sounds like a lot of, analytics and trying to understand, the sprawl and consumption of these different APIs. But from there, then how do, someone actually execute on that strategy? What are the key things that you typically see to try and drive efficiency through these, different API programs?
I mean, I've talked to quite a few folks. I talked to people in the public sector as well as the private sector, just taking existing APIs, whether they're REST, whether they're SOAP, whatever they can, trying to expose them as just simple REST, really focusing there because that's the cheapest, that's the easiest, that's what teams know. But they're just taking individual resources and assessing, well, who's using them, getting an awareness of who's using them, what are they doing with it, and making sure that they have the analytics in place to kind of understand that and observe and see that, and then start really kind of inventorying those digital resources. So each path, you have images or videos or accounts or whatever those slash digital resources you have, and then understanding how people are using them. They're hopefully they have existing customers. If they don't, deprecate them, they should go away, but they're there. Um, who's using them? And then start thinking about, well, how do these work as bundles with other resources? In government, I'm seeing a lot of groups who are like, how do we, join forces with other departments, other agencies? Because we know our resources, we know their resources, different applications spread across those. How do we optimize and build better business models and value exchange at those levels? So really it's pretty fundamental. It's just basic API paths and operations, tagging and organizing those, pulling the data on who's using them, pulling reports on that to try to understand what's happening, and then getting all the business and engineering stakeholders together to talk about, all right, what's next? What's sensible? Where can we start? Maybe making, changing up our plans a little bit, changing up our rate limits, using less, um, fewer resources. I mean, that's the interesting thing. I know you guys are very, you guys are analytics and very monetization product focused, but this is an intersection of technical and business. So like rate limits, is a common conversation in the technical side, but rate limits feed into your business plan and your usage and what this costs and what people are paying for. And so you should really understand that technical details, but then put them on the table with the business details and then have a conversation with the human beings who reflect both sides of that coin as well.
I really like this term value exchange, around these APIs, especially as we, try and drive efficiency through these businesses. Is that the same as monetization, or, when does it make sense to monetize, and if it's not monetization, what is value exchange?
I mean, that's all part of that understanding your consumer. And I would say even having a conversation it's pretty identical right up to the point where maybe the credit card doesn't get charged. You're still metering, measuring, understanding your consumers. You're still invoicing them and saying, hey, here's how much of this resource you use, Department C or West Coast Group. And here's those resources that we maintain, the ones that cost us 50 grand per resource to stand up, and you're using them, and let's have a conversation about that on a regular basis because you're a producer and or I'm a producer, you're a consumer, and we're exchanging value. There's got to be reciprocity here. So you either got to be paying, and or it's got to be justified that, hey, we're incurring these costs and you're using them, and then there's got to be some other value exchange or something, so it's just really a lot of times I've come across government agencies. One was in the Department of Commerce, and they said, well, we've got, they were talking at a panel. We were doing these kind of roundtable sessions as part of the General Services Administration, and a whole bunch of different agencies came in. So Commerce is up there on the panel. I'm on the panel. We're talking, and they said, well, we've got like this API. It's got like 5 users, but it's quite a bit of traffic on it. It's a useful resource, but it's just never really exploded into the thing we thought it was going to be. And so we're probably going to figure out how to wind that down, and move on to something else. And then hand went up in the audience, and the person goes, well, I'm with NOAA, the National Oceanic Administration, and we're one of those users. And you're totally critical to like 6 different groups I know who are doing research. And if you shut it down, it's going to be a real big problem for a bunch of projects we have going on. So, can we maybe talk about that? And so, what I see is a lot of things like that happening over and over and over where groups just don't talk. These are digital. We don't have a handle on who's using it, and we don't have a plan, a business plan in place. We don't have any monetization strategy. It's just as simple as that.
That's a really interesting point where you have an API, it's used by only a very handful or small group, number of people, but maybe there is a lot of value being, delivered to those APIs, or, one of those users happens to be, one of the largest, business units or customers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important. And I think there's a kind of a sickness that creeps in, around scale sometimes, that everything's got to be big and massive. And unfortunately, a lot of the promise around public APIs was that you kind of build it, they will come mentality where, you put out a pretty basic resource that costs you $50,000 to stand up, but it's useful to 15 people who, will pay anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 a month for those resources or something, and then maybe you can crack that open, find some new interesting ones. There's a lot of opportunities there without going big. Not everything's got to be big, and there's a lot of value in the cracks.
We're starting to see that as well, starting smaller with a smaller group of design partners to help really iterate quickly on that API strategy versus big marketing launch and the days of 2021 and spending lots of money on that type of stuff. These days it is much more important to drive efficiency even through these new initiatives. But as someone who's setting up a new API and trying to externalize that, what are some of the key challenges that you see, and what are folks doing today to address that versus even a couple of years ago?
Well, I mean, I don't want to be a downer on it, but I'm seeing a lot of people kind of closing up and tightening up their portals. And because there's a lot of there was already a lot of fear. I remember Pinterest, when Pinterest first was kind of talking to people on the forum about launching an API. They're like, oh, we want to do this thoughtfully. We don't want to like make the same mistakes as Twitter. So this is like what, 2017 or 18, I forget when they launched. So there's always been a lot of anxiety around public APIs and how do you launch it? How do you support it? How do you do it right? Um, but look at like Twitter and Reddit and anybody else who's got a valuable resource right now. What's happened to it because of kind of the appetite around AI consumption? It's kind of, scary to have your valuable resource out there, even if you do have a portal and a login and keys and analytics in place. But you got to have a pretty tight business plan and plan on the front end of that. And I'm not just saying like well thought out initially, like you need to be well down this road and have some experience and be playing around with what works and doesn't work and building up the muscles on your team to understand that design of your API, that design of your business plan, know your audience, know your customer, and be able to really iterate before you're going to have I think, uh, a solid defensive strategy in an AI era that's so volatile and so crazy. So honestly, I think more people are worried about having public APIs, but that doesn't mean they're going away. They're just kind of going shadowy and darker, and people are needing like Moesif to like make sense of this and understand it. So it's going to kind of go back to that, I think, that partner dimension where it's like, oh, they're public APIs. But we only tell you about it if you talk to us and we know you and we trust you, which just, you still need to keep your public portal, your public strategy. You need to have solid security on the front end of that. But like I said, your security, your rate limits, the technical details give way to the business part, the metrics, the dashboards, the plans, the revenue, the costs, the billing, the invoicing, all of that stuff in there. Um, it's just as important as security and DDoS attack. Is like you need a business defense, a business line, a plan. Otherwise, it's going to be too volatile, too crazy out there to be out there with anything valuable, any resources.
Does this mean maybe, things like developer first and, all the PLG stuff we've heard for the last few years, is that, going the wayside to more of these, I would say, closed, build a relationship with someone? And kind of what does that mean from a go-to-market standpoint? How do you think about go-to-market of an API program or external API?
I don't think it's going to go away. I mean, these things don't just disappear. But it's going to get much harder. It's going to get, much more, the wins against it and the things against you and the things you're going to have to think about are going to be a lot more difficult to do. And so it's going to be partner, know your customer, know, KYD, know your developer, have a firm kind of grasp on that. And a lot of groups don't really, a lot of large enterprises don't understand that with a public API portal, like how to do that performance properly, what to put out there, what not to, how to have an access control layer, how to have that set up. So it's scary. And but you still need that transparency and that kind of public access. Honestly, it should just be part of your regular public website, in my opinion, and be out there. And you should have, it's just like anything else on your website. What do you put publicly? What do you put behind a paywall? And how do you monitor its usage and understand its usage and evolve it so that you can be doing this well. It's really not any different than your web properties and your mobile properties. It's just whatever your applications are.
That totally makes sense there. And speaking on getting analytics and understanding consumption, we've been hearing quite a few folks think around how AI is impacting that cost. It could be sometimes quite high. You're building out a new API and suddenly there's real costs associated with it that we haven't really seen before just to run the API. How is that impacting these things like monetization and potentially some of these somewhat closed or open API programs, and where do you see that going, right? Especially as now cost is being considered.
Well, AI just got a lot cheaper. I don't know if you heard.
Very true,
Um,
very true.
Seriously though, you know, that's part of that cost management. I mean, you've got to understand uh what it takes to operate these things. What does each API cost to stand up, maintain? What are the direct and indirect costs? You got to have a handle on that. And that's what the cloud was kind of supposed to promise, I think, us to kind of slice and dice this a little bit better. I don't think it's fully lived up to that, but you got to have that cost side and have real numbers and a real spreadsheet, a real formula for like what's expensive here, what's worthwhile doing, and then translate that into the consumption side, and with the right metrics and analytics, service composition, organizing your API resources, understanding your consumers, and you got to do the math on all of that. You gotta have a spreadsheet or a good solution like Moesif to help you kind of see, build a dashboard and understand it, because it's going to get tight here. I think a lot of people spend a lot of money, not just, I don't want to just point at AI. I think there's been a lot of spend in a lot of technological areas that people are pulling back on. I'm already seeing companies start having to do more with less. I think there's a lot of promises around labor and employees and being able, what was the Gartner thing with Twitter is, Gartner is saying that, people either need their existing staff to do 10x or they need to cut their staff 10%, you know? And so how do you translate that into a dashboard and a set of API resources? All right, what are our API resources and how does our existing staff take that and squeeze 10% or 10x more work out of those resources we have by cleaning house, organizing, better understanding customers, getting some freeloaders off some APIs maybe that were launched at a certain time for a certain thing that doesn't exist anymore. So just get more efficient about, assessing the API landscape and enterprise and public. And then figuring out, well, how are we going to make money on this? How are we going to pay for it and do it sensibly?
Makes sense. Does that mean the role of the API product manager or product owner is changing? Especially as these teams are trying to get more efficient and lean. What does the API product manager do today that they're not doing 5 years ago with these APIs?
Honestly, I don't think it's going to change a whole lot. I mean, I think for me, AI is just another application of our digital resources. Web had certain constraints, desktop has certain constraints if you're doing IoT, if you're doing mobile, if you rode the last bot wave was like 2016. If you got on any of the iPaaS kind of integration platforms, there's there's been a lot of different waves. There was there was an AI wave around 2012, 13, Wolfram Alpha and IBM Watson, and it wasn't as big as this moment we're in right now. This is, massive. But there's all these waves, and you've got to assess like what are the applications of my digital resources? What new digital resources are we going to invest in? Which ones need to go away? And you run it like any other supply chain and factory and warehouse and distribution, channels, is figure out what's making you money and what's not. And I think hopefully the smoke and mirrors from AI kind of will go down a little bit, and people can kind of get a little bit more honest about the math of what all this costs and start figuring out where the actual value is.
Makes sense there, and we're definitely seeing a lot of innovation, especially with the AI stuff. But it's hard to also parse through what is next. We've been hearing about AI gateways and trying to understand AI as a product or AI products, just like we saw with the API wave. But what do you see coming in next with APIs and how AI is impacting that?
So here's my stance as API evangelist. Nothing. I don't care. Like it's not AI, anything. I'm sticking to the fundamentals. And this starting next week, like Tuesday, 1 o'clock, I'm gonna have a basic fundamentals of schema workshop. They're paid, and here's basics of schema. 2 o'clock is basics of APIs, open API, what are the different types of APIs, a lot of what we just talked about. 3 o'clock is operations. What should you have? You should have a portal. You should have documentation. You should have an open API for these. So that's Tuesday. Three fundamentals that I feel like are really missing. People just don't know their schema. They don't know a open API, and they don't know their operations and have a consistent operational definition. Now, or Thursday, excuse me, is going to be governance of that we just talked about. So spectral rules and how do you lint that? And then change, 2 o'clock is going to be changes, where you just deal with changes, change management, versioning. How do you source control? How do you have a source of truth? And then 3 o'clock is going to be evangelism. How do you talk to people about this? How do you engage stakeholders? How do you have a conversation? And so 6 fundamentals that are rampant across every enterprise. Nothing's changed. It's HTTP. I'm not even talking GraphQL. I'm not going to talk Kafka. I'm not going to talk any of that. Your applications, how you apply your digital resources are up to you. Web, mobile, desktop, AI. I'll talk to you about those nuances and how that impacts, but really outside of that. And then once this is stood up, Wednesdays are going to be where I start diving into other fundamentals. So monetization is going to be one of the 1 o'clock, where it's just basic service composition, basic analytics, basic metrics. And then I'm wavering between HTTP, pagination, rate limiting, and a couple other fundamentals. And I'll probably rotate between those on Wednesdays. It'll be the kind of looser day. I'm not going to talk to you about anything that's outlandish, out crazy, because those are the same topics I've been talking about since 2010. And that basic monetization piece is like very little's changed, very little's gotten better. We've gotten better tools and better services and better approaches. But really the need and the challenges remained consistent. And I don't see them going away at all. So I'm going to just stay true to the course, stick to the fundamentals, and then I'll let y'all, everybody else worry about the application of those resources. I'll just help you kind of, think about those essentials.
Totally agree, and definitely staying close to fundamentals and ensuring meeting customer needs is still more important than chasing the next shiny object. We've seen so many
Amen.
waves where APIs impact everything from crypto and
Oh,
other waves as well. So at the end of the
Bitcoin,
day, it's about
Bitcoin
good
and
API
crypto.
design and API governance, right? So
Yeah, yeah, just the basics. And I'm going to do that for a few years. And I mean, I think that's why what you guys offer is so important, because the value exchange piece, yes, the monetization piece, the analysis, the analytics of that API landscape is critical, is essential. It's not rocket science, but you got to do it, and you got to do it consistently over time before you're going to get better at it.
Well, appreciate having you here, Ken, for our podcast. Any parting thoughts you want to leave with the audience?
Uh, I mean, just, you know, figure out, what do you do as an enterprise? Really kind of hang on to that in this moment. I think things feel like they're moving faster than they ever have before. They're volatile, they're crazy. That's not true. That's just fabricated, manufactured. Stick to what you do best. Understand that, understand your customers, and figure out the best ways you can kind of iterate and work on that. The rest, will work itself out. It'll kind of calm down a little bit here until whatever's next, and if you just have your kind of API strategy together, you're going to be able to weather this stuff and you're going to be able to make money and you're going to be able to adjust over time.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate being here, Ken, and until next time.
All right. Thanks.